So let's take a little bit of time here to talk about third declension adjectives. When we work with third declension adjectives, or really any type of adjectives, there's a few things we need to keep in mind. The first of those is that an adjective is a word which modifies or describes a noun or a pronoun. Um, and that's a simple definition of adjective. It's true in Latin and in English. An adjective is a word that describes, it modifies a noun or a pronoun. Now, in Latin, when we work with an adjective, the adjective must agree with the noun it modifies or the pronoun it modifies in three specific things. These are, first of all, the case of the noun, secondly, the number, whether it's singular or plural, and thirdly, the gender, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. So when you're working with an adjective, the first thing you really need to do is look at the noun. Figure out its case, its number, and its gender. These must be the same. Now remember, this does not necessarily mean that they're going to have matching endings. The endings will be the same in the sense that they'll be the same case, same number, same gender, but they might not look the same. If you're using a third declension adjective with a second declension noun, then definitely these endings are going to look different. But they are going to represent the same case, the same number, and the same gender. Now, specifically when we're looking at third declension adjectives, we have three types of these. The first type is the type that's going to be presented to us using three forms, such as acer, with the three forms there of acer, acris, and acre. Now, when we see this particular type, these three forms are the three various nominative singular forms. Acer is the nominative masculine singular, acris is the nominative feminine singular, and acre will be our nominative neuter singular. So they're in that normal order that we're used to seeing these in, and that's just like when you're working with first and second declension adjectives. So that's relatively normal looking to us. The second type that we might see is going to be one with two forms, where the first form ends in the letters is. And so this might be a word like fortis, forte. Now when we see these, it changes a little bit for us. That first form, fortis in this case, is going to be the nominative singular, both masculine and feminine. But the second form we see there is going to be the neuter form. So fortis, forte here, fortis is going to be the masculine and the feminine nominative singular. Forte is the neuter nominative singular. Now the third type we're going to see is when we see two forms and the second form ends in is. And so an example of this is the word felix, felicus. When we see this, the first form is the nominative singular of all three genders. So felix here is nominative singular masculine, feminine, and neuter. The second form, that one that ends with is, is going to be the genitive singular. Now there is a reason why they give us these two forms, and that comes into a simple rule for us here, which is to create the stem of any of these types, regardless of what type it is, we're going to remove is from whichever form ends in the letter is. And of course, it's from this stem that we can add the endings to create the various cases, numbers, and genders that we are going to need for these adjectives. Now, again, when we're working with these, we're going to be matching them up to our nouns. And so for this, we have to know the endings that we're going to be using. And with the third declension adjectives, we're going to be using third declension I stem endings. And so these are pretty straightforward. They're forms that we've seen before. In the singular, the masculine and feminines are going to always be the same. You'll notice I put some question marks in here. That nominative singular, as we've seen in nouns, can have a whole lot of different looks. These are going to be provided for us, just as we just saw. For instance, with fortis, forte, fortis would be the masculine feminine nominative singular. Forte would be the neuter nominative singular. As you go through here, you'll find that the genitives, is, dative, long I, they're what you're used to seeing with the nouns. On the accusative, that em ending in the masculine and feminative. In the neuter, again, see the question mark. This is going to be identical to whatever the nominative is, and that's just following the neuter patterns that says the accusative always matches the nominative. Finally, with the ablative, we see a long I ending there. You're not going to ever use a short E with these particular adjectives. Now, in the plural, we're going to see similar setup here. In the nominative plural, long ES for the masculine infinitive. The neuter is going to end with IA. Notice the I there because we are using the I stem endings. In the genitive, we're looking at IUM, regardless of gender. In the dative, IBUS, regardless of gender. Again, the accusative matches up with the nominative, and the ablative plural matches up with the dative plural. And so these are the endings that we're working with when we're using adjectives. It's actually a little bit easier than first and second declension when you think about how few there are here. When working with these, we are going to, of course, have to have two steps in order to create the right forms. Step one is to identify the case, number, and gender of the noun that is being modified. So you've got to figure out these three things of the noun being modified before you can do anything else. And step two is going to be to create the corresponding form of the adjective. Let's look at a quick example of this. We might have the word philios, and we might want to modify it with the word fortis. Now, when we work with this, we've got to, of course, pay attention to the gender, the case, and the number of philios. And the first thing we're going to notice here is that the gender is feminine. And we should know that just from our knowledge of vocabulary, or we could look in a dictionary and find this, that philios is feminine. Hopefully, we are learning the genders of our nouns as we go through them. Of course, philia, meaning daughter, you could probably successfully guess that it's feminine. But don't always rely on the definition telling you these things. The next thing we do, of course, we're looking at that ending, the long AS ending. And that's going to tell us the case of this, which is going to be accusative. It's also going to tell us the number, which is plural. So just by looking at philios, we can tell that it is feminine, it is accusative, and that it is plural. So in order to create the right form of the adjective, we figured this out. Now we just need to make sure we're using the right ending. And so we can just look at the plural chart. We look at the feminine column of that chart, which is, of course, shared with masculine. Drop down to the accusative, we see that we're going to need a long ES ending. So, removing the IS from fortis gives us the stem of fort, F-O-R-T. We add the long ES, and so our adjective is going to be fortes, F-O-R-T, long ES. Now, this, of course, is only going to work when you can figure out all three things, the gender, the case, and the number. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to figure these out. Remember that sometimes an ending, for instance, AE, can be multiple things. AE can be the genitive singular, it can be a dative singular, it could be a nominative plural. When that's the case, you're going to have to actually use other things to figure out which one it is. We may already have another adjective modifying it, in which case we can use that adjective to further let us key in on what it is. Other times it might be in a sentence, and we can use the context of the sentence to figure out the actual form of it. But once you figured out those three things, the case, the number, and the gender, it becomes pretty easy to match up the endings. And so just use these charts, rely on those, and you should be able to figure out what the various forms are.